of the vehicle, you're going to start off on the right hand side. We can have a tail light and a white light, which I presume is for reversing. Exhaust, one on each side. You'll see that they're coated to stop people from burning themselves. If it's asbestos or canvas, I'm not entirely sure, but it is woven material. It's basically a cloth. Final drives underneath, again, like most British tanks of the era, they were rear-wheel drive, for lack of a better term, so you could top up your lubricants with that. Again, we have the solid cast tracks with casting numbers on them. As we come further over to the side, this is a very simple retention system for the louvers for the transmission. Jettisonable fuel tank. The British had a couple of ways of extending the range, especially in the desert where pit stops were kind of few and far between. The fuel tank was the more successful one. The other one that they had was the Rota trailer, R-O-T-A trailer, all one word. And a worse implement of war has probably never been devised. So if you have a couple of minutes to spare and you want to laugh, go find an Operation Think Tank David Fletcher talking about the Rota trailer. And he has some very choice words to say on the matter. Finally, a number of Matildas would also have basically a doorbell or a gong. On the outside of the tank, you'd push a button, it would sound an alarm inside the tank, and the TC would stick his head up and find out who was the infantryman that had disturbed him. As you follow the exhaust down, you see the two mufflers. So there's an exhaust pipe on each side of the tank, obviously, and the mufflers are staggered alternately, one to the right, one facing left, but otherwise they're identical. Again, at the back we have these single-piece links which are bolted into place. So if one of these things breaks, you just unbolt it and you put it back in. You don't have to go after it with a welder or anything. There are also eyelets at the very back here. And we have a pipe from the fuel tank, comes down and enters a feed at the rear hull. Now, unlike a lot of the Soviet tanks, which would have external fuel tanks that weren't directly fed, you would actually have to siphon the fuel in. The British fuel tank was part of the fuel system. Downside, it wasn't a quick release detach. You actually had to come around the back and take these off if you had to. All right, so next thing we're going to do is hop on the back deck and we'll see if we can see what propels this thing along at its blistering top speed of 15 miles an hour. Well, I guess we used the mud chutes to get a foothold. The mud chutes were not particularly successful. The idea was that as the dirt is dragged up from the return of the track, the dirt would slide down the chutes. Now, it worked fine for sand. Unfortunately, the mud chutes did not shoot the mud very well. So it was always a bit of a flaw in the design. But it does seem to be a good foothold. Easy enough to get up, I have to say. All right, let's see if I can open up some of these things. Looks like I can. This is probably a two-man job. As a concession to the economic realities of the 30s and frankly also just to shorten the development time, it was decided to use the engine of a London double-decker bus. So it's a 6-cylinder diesel inline, and of course the one issue is that because the double-decker bus tends not to weigh quite as much as a tank, they put two of them in. So we have two engines. They were initially the AEC of 87 horsepower, and then later they went with Leylands of 95 apiece. The two engines side by side are connected through a system here to a single crankshaft all the way down in the middle here, directly underneath these two pipes which go to the transmission compartment. And of course the prop shaft goes to the transmission compartment as well. On each side we're going to see the two fuel tanks and the oil tanks. Oil tanks are here with what is the simplest dipstick you'll ever see in your life. That's it. Not even screwed into place. Fuel tanks again, one on each side. This is a pump for priming. You basically lift up and down and you start pumping some of the fuel in. To actually fill the tank, you lift up the louvers on each side, and I'll show you that now in a second after I get up. Diesel system, of course, there are no spark plugs. Carburetors, though, still to mix the air and the diesel. And not really much else here. I mean, the tank engines at the time were pretty simple. And diesels get even simpler. And of course, everything under here is under big, heavy louvers that you have to lift up just to check the oil. Although the fuel tank, as I say, is a little bit simpler. If you come over here, it's a simple hinge that you just lift up. Fuel, oil. Can't even get that wrong. But it's still not light. Nothing on this tank is light. Crew comfort obviously wasn't a consideration back then. Hi everybody, meet Clay. He's one of the cameramen helping out here.
Tankers.
You may know him from the Upgrade Your Weapon video. He has a second career as an actor. Alright, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, sir. Alright, so now we've got the thing opened up. We have a look at the cooling and transmission compartment. 2 individual cooling systems, 1 for each engine. So you could argue that there's twice as much to go wrong, but you've also got the argument that, well, you can at least limp on one if you have to. Although if max speed was 15, I hate to imagine how slow a limp is. Fan underneath, driven mechanically. The transmission system, it's a pre-selector system. We'll have a look at that when we get to the driver's hole. And the steering is done by brakes. It's no neutral steer or anything fancy like that. And if you look at the brakes, they're actually sort of an external drum. That these are the brake pads themselves on the outside, and as you pull back the lever, it simply compresses the pads through the compression system here, and that's how you slow it down. It's about as simple a brake as you're going to find, and you'll see the size of it obviously to hold the weight of the tank. From here it goes into the final drives and then to the sprocket wheels. If you want to know what gear the engine is from looking at it, they've actually been nice enough to mark with a pointer where the gear lever is right now. It's in neutral. I'm happy enough to say it was, considering this tank hasn't run in many years, it was surprisingly easy to open up, and now we get to put it back down again. If I can enlist the aid of my beautiful assistant one more time, Clay. All right, start with the middle one again. Watch your fingers and toes. Oh. Hang on, no, we got 2. I can imagine doing this every day or every couple of hours of the day. That brings us to the end of the tour of how the machine works. Now, next part of the video, we're going to go in and have a look at how you make it work. So we'll see you at the next one.